Hello, welcome to Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FMLA expansion, and federal paid sick leave. My name is Angelina, and I will be going through some instructions. Hola y bienvenido a este webinario, que lo vamos a hacer en español también. So for those of you that are on, we're going to do some instructions. I'm going to do English first and then Spanish. We are simultaneously translating this presentation this afternoon. Thank you. So please select, you should have an option for interpretation down at the bottom of your screen. So step one, click on the interpretation button at the bottom of the webinar screen. Next slide. It will give you a language preference. If you want to choose English, you can choose English right now or Spanish. Congratulations, you should be able to hear the presentation in the language you selected. If you're having trouble, please send us a message through the chat function and we'll provide assistance. Ahora las instrucciones en español. El paso 1, oprima el botón que dice Interpretation en la parte de abajo del webinario. Next slide. Escoja la preferencia del idioma, español. Felicidades, usted debería de ahora poder escuchar esta presentación en el idioma que seleccionó. Si tiene algún problema, por favor, use la función de abajo de chat para mandarnos un mensaje. Next slide. Just some general directions. If you can't hear us or the volume isn't working, please adjust your settings on your computer or item that you're using. Next slide. If you can't hear us, please again, and you called in, please again try to adjust the function on your phone. Everyone is on mute, so we won't be able to hear you. Please send a message through chat. Next slide, please. We will hold all questions until after, thank you, until after the presenter, we will answer questions until after the presenter is done presenting the information. So if you have questions, please, we encourage you to use the chat function. We will be checking the chat function, and then at the end of the presentation, we will review the questions that haven't already been answered and provide answers for you then. All right, next slide, please. All right, so I want to introduce our speaker for this afternoon, Patrick Moody. He is with Barsamian and Moody. He is a partner there. He has been with them for over 30 years, providing agricultural employers with legal advice and compliance to stay in compliance with California laws. And I'm here to present him. So Pat, if you want to take it away.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining, everybody. Again, as we said at the start, it's probably easier for me to go through the material that I have and then compile questions for later. Otherwise, we'll end up answering questions on the first couple of slides for the next hour or so and never get through all the material. You'll find that the material is pretty comprehensive, and it will answer a great many of your questions. Obviously, there's going to be some things that it doesn't answer, and I'm happy to answer those at the end. So first thing here, just one little disclaimer. This is not real legal advice. I'm not your attorney. I'm presenting very summarized material here. So if you have specific questions, do consult with either myself or your attorney of your choice, and we'll get you specific answers. So the first thing we want to talk about here is this change in the law, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. And what this does is it makes a change to the Federal Family Medical Leave Act. It was passed by Congress and then signed by President Trump on March 18th. It's supposed to, by its definition, take effect on April 2nd, 15 days after it was signed by the president, but all of the information that the EEOC has put out, the DOL has put out, the Department of Treasury has put out, everybody is saying that it takes effect April 1. So you're safer to assume that it applies to after April 1. It does apply to those employers with 500 or fewer employees. We're going to talk a little bit about that definition, but it's for 500 or fewer employees. Why they picked 500, I don't know, but that's the number that they picked. So if you have more than 500 employees, and again, we're going to talk about how you calculate that, this doesn't apply to you. They are talking about adding something for larger employees, those with over 500. We don't know what that's going to be. They have not passed anything yet. There's all sorts of speculation about what that might be, but as of yet, they have not passed anything for employers with over 500 employees. This is 500 or fewer employees. So what this law does is a couple of things. It introduces some paid sick leave, federal paid sick leave, and we'll talk in more detail about that, what that entails. And then it also expands the availability of leave under the Family Medical Leave Act for one specific reason. And we're going to talk about what that is, but it's one specific reason. I'm getting lots of questions from people about how this is just going to open up everything, and everybody, whoever wants to take time off can take time off, and they're going to get paid time off. And it's not that broad as people are thinking it is, and we will go through the details of that. This law does a bunch of other things. If you want to read the law, there's all sorts of things that are included in that law that will go way beyond what we need to talk about today. So we are going to limit it to the expansion of the Family Medical Leave Act and the paid sick leave. So they will, we're just going to talk about that. There is, like I say, lots of other stuff. If you want to read it, you can. It's all out there for you if you want to do that. So the couple of key things they did here is they changed the definition of who is a covered employer under the Family Medical Leave Act. So normally the definition of a covered employer is somebody who employs 50 or more employees for 20 or more work weeks in either this calendar year or the preceding calendar year. And what they did for purposes of this amendment only is to exchange that definition for the definition 500 or fewer employees. And so that we look at that 500 employees as the day that the employee's leave begins. I see a typo there that I've never seen before, but anyway, there's a typo. I apologize for that. But you look at 500 or fewer employees on the day the employee's leave is set to begin. And they've also drastically changed the definition of who is a covered employee from somebody who has worked for you for 12 months and has worked 1,250 hours in the preceding 12 months. And they've changed that to say that it's any employee who has worked for you for at least 30 days prior to the leave. And they have clarified that that's 30 calendar days prior to leave, not 30 work days, but 30 calendar days prior to the leave. So if they've worked for you for 30 days, they are entitled to coverage under this new law. There is, and I've gotten a bunch of questions from small companies saying that there is a way for small businesses to get an exemption. So if you have less than 50 employees and you meet one of these three criteria that are laid out here, basically that if granting the sick leave pay or the FMLA would result in expenses or obligations exceeding your available revenues, then you wouldn't have to do it. If the absence of the employees would basically shut your business down, or there's not enough other workers who are able and willing, qualified to do the work, that granting leave would basically shut the business down. If that's the case and you meet one of those three criteria and you have less than 50 employees, there's a way to apply to the Secretary of Labor, the U.S. Secretary of Labor, to get an exemption from this. They have not set forth how to actually go about applying for that exemption. They've just said that there is this potential exemption out there if you meet these criteria. So I don't know what exactly it's going to entail, whether it's, they're going to have some form you've got to fill out, or you can write in and request it, or how it's going to go about actually doing this. But that's something that is out there if you meet these criteria as a small business. So the change to the Family Medical Leave Act and the actual leave under the Family Medical Leave Act is one reason only. And that is, if you have an employee who cannot work and who cannot work remotely, meaning they can't perform, telecommuting or whatever, and work remotely, and they need to care for a minor child, if the child's school is closed, or if the daycare person they have is closed due to a public health emergency related to coronavirus, then there is leave available under the Family Medical Leave Act. This is the only additional reason for leave under this act. This does not mean that if somebody feels like they are sick and they want to take leave for this, that they automatically get leave. That does not mean that. This is the only reason for the additional leave under the Family Medical Leave Act, this Emergency Family Medical Leave Act amendment to the FMLAs. If the school is closed or the daycare is closed and it's due to public health emergency and the employee needs to care for their child. So we all know right now that all schools in the state of California are currently closed. That means that for right now, they have that ability to say my school is closed, and if I need to care for my child, that could apply here. However, it's almost the 1st of April, schools get out in late May or early June, depending on your school district. After that time, that school closure isn't going to apply. Then it would be limited to daycare closure. So it's a very limited expansion of leave availability under the Family Medical Leave Act for this purpose. Some of this new leave will be paid. The first 10 days of this leave is unpaid. Now, we're going to talk later about the paid sick leave provisions of this act and how there is, in fact, an ability to get this time covered. But in general, under this law, the first 10 days are unpaid. If your employee has any substituted or any accrued vacation or PTO, or they can use their California mandated paid sick leave of 3 days or 24 hours, they can use that to substitute for the unpaid leave. You cannot require them to do so as the employer. They can choose to, but you cannot require them to do so. After that 10-day period, you must pay the employee who qualifies for this leave. Again, it's that very, very limited reason. They must get paid 2/3 of their regular rate of pay for the number of hours they otherwise would have worked. Now, there is a limitation on that of up to $200 per day and a total of $10,000 per employee. So in the aggregate over the entire period of time. So they're limited to $200 per day and a total of $10,000 over the entire time of the leave. So that's the maximum that anyone can get. The part-time employees, if you've got a part-time employee, you would look at the number of hours that that person would normally work. And if they haven't worked for you for very long, you can look back and see, what would they have worked over the past 6 months? If they haven't worked for you long enough, you would say, what is it that they're normally expected to work? How many hours would they typically be scheduled to work? And that's the amount of hours that you would have to pay for that time frame. You don't need to pay an overtime premium, but you count the number of hours that the person would normally have worked. So if you have somebody who normally works overtime, you would count that as hours that they would normally work, but you would pay that though at the regular straight time rate, not at an overtime rate. So I hope that's clear. If you have less than 25 employees, there is a way around the typical reinstatement obligation under the Family Medical Leave Act. There's a number of things that this statute does not change, and I'm going to talk about some of those in addition here in a minute. But one of the main things that does not change is the fact that there is a right to reinstatement after this leave, and the person gets to get reinstated to their job. Now, if you have fewer than 25 employees and that position no longer exists because the economy turned down and you've lost business or something else related to this coronavirus pandemic, then you do not have to replace them. But it's if that job no longer exists. You do, however, have to make reasonable attempts to restore the person to an equivalent position for up to 1 year after their leave. Reasonable or an equivalent position is sort of the same benefits and pay and other terms and conditions. And that 1 year time frame where you have to make reasonable efforts to reinstate them is measured from the end of the leave or 12 weeks from after the leave began, whichever is earlier. So you need to keep that in mind. If you're under 25 employees, that can apply to you. So again, other things that are not changed. The basic duration of FMLA leave is still only 12 weeks. So if the person used up 10 weeks of FMLA leave for some other reason, they've only got 2 weeks of this left. This is not 12 weeks of regular FMLA leave and then 12 weeks of this. It's a total still of 12 weeks. The paid leave after the initial 10 days does not extend anything beyond the 10-week total duration. So again, if somebody has used prior leave, their amount of leave that they've got left would be limited, and the paid leave is limited to the max total of 12-week in your FMLA year, whether it's your anniversary year for the employee or the calendar year or rolling forward, rolling back, whatever your designated FMLA year is. This does not extend beyond the 12-week normal duration of FMLA leave. There is still the general requirement that if there's going to be foreseeable leave need, then the employee has to give you foreseeable leave notice. They have to give you some advance notice. If it's unforeseeable, they need to provide as much notice as is reasonably possible. Another thing that doesn't change here is you're still entitled to request and obtain documentation substantiating the need for the leave. You can still get documentation, so you can still do that. Let's talk here a little bit about counting the 500 employees. So again, the threshold level here is 500 or fewer employees. And so what we look at is on the day the employee begins leave, you start counting the employees. You count. And so the people that drafted this did not have agriculture in mind, and they didn't have in mind fluctuating workforces. They're thinking of, a factory or something that has, 300 employees every single day out of every year. They have the same work levels. They're not thinking of agriculture where you might have, 100 people now, and in 3 weeks you're going to have 1,000. They did not consider that in this case. And so they are supposed to be issuing some regulations. Maybe they will clarify this. I don't think they will. I don't think they're thinking of this. The people that draft this stuff don't necessarily think of all the different workforces out there that they're affecting. And I don't think that they've taken into consideration how ag is sort of unique in that regard, where our work levels fluctuate so drastically up and down. And so in theory, you might have a situation where 1 week you're covered because you have fewer than 500 employees, and the next week you're not covered because you have more than 500 employees. I think you're going to have to make a choice there that you're either going to be covered or you're not going to be covered. And I think you should err on the side of being covered. We don't want to err on the side of not being covered. The Eeoc guidance that they put out, and there's a link to it at the very end of this slideshow. They did put out some good stuff, and it talks about the counting the 500 employees, and if you're getting them through a temp agency, not necessarily a labor contractor, but a temp agency where you're controlling the workers and you're directing the workers, and you're supervising what they're doing, then that those employees should be counted. But if we're looking at terms of like a farm labor contractor where you're not providing the supervision and the direction, then you wouldn't count those. So you would count temp employees, probably not FLC employees. If you are a situation where you've got multiple companies and you don't know whether to count all of the employees for all of the companies together or separately, the Eeoc does use an single integrated employer test for determining when to combine the companies for FMLA purposes. It's a very long, convoluted test. If you're up in the air on whether you might fall under this or not, I would strongly suggest that you consult, experienced labor counsel who can help you through that. But there's a couple of things here you want to look at in general. The degree of interrelationship between the operations. Do you have managers go back and forth? Do you have employees go back and forth? Is there centralized control of labor relations? Do multiple companies share an HR department? Do you have a single workers' comp policy? Do you have a single handbook? Things like that. Then they look at in terms of common ownership and financial control over the entities. But again, these are a couple of the highlights. There's a very convoluted test. If you think you might have multiple enterprises that should be counted together or maybe not counted together, again, I strongly encourage you to consult with experienced labor counsel and get that question answered for you. There's some joint employer issues sometimes, and there's sort of very extensive, again, region tests that determine what this comes into play on. And so you want to make sure that if you have questions on this, that you do get some experienced labor counsel to help you make that determination. Okay, so that is the expansion of the leave law requirement under the FMLA. And again, it's limited to leave under the FMLA. Now, this section, we're going to talk about the new paid sick leave requirement. And there are 6 reasons here for obtaining leave under this section where someone's going to be entitled to get up to 80 hours of paid sick leave. So the first one is if they've been ordered to quarantine or isolate themselves due to coronavirus, if they've been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine, again, due to coronavirus, if they're experiencing the coronavirus symptoms, cough, fever, chills, those kinds of things, and they're seeking medical diagnosis. If they're caring for somebody, here's another little difference. It's not just a family member as defined normally under the FMLA, but if they're caring for somebody who is subject to one of these quarantine orders or who has been advised to self-quarantine and that person has to care for that individual, your employee has to care for them, that is one of the qualifying reasons for paid sick leave. The 5th one is the same as the FMLA expanded leave, and that is to care for the child if the daycare or school is closed due to coronavirus. And then they've got this sort of catch-all that they haven't defined yet, that they have left themselves open to expand upon, which says anything similar to this as set forth by the Secretary of Health and Human Services after consultation with the Secretary of Treasury and the Secretary of Labor. They haven't issued anything that says what qualifies for that yet. So really we're kind of looking at those first 5, but those are the only reasons that qualify for paid sick leave. So this is not an example of somebody who says, hey, my coworker looks like they're sick, I'm staying home. I don't feel good, I'm staying home. Any of those types of things, that does not qualify for this. It has to be coronavirus related. And again, you are able to request documentation. So if somebody says to you, you've got an employee says, hey, I've been told to quarantine, I've been ordered to quarantine because of coronavirus, you're able to ask for a copy of the quarantine order that shows that they've been ordered to quarantine. Or if they say, my doctor has told me or my healthcare provider has told me to self-quarantine because I might have that, you're entitled to get a doctor's note that says so. You're entitled to get that. So you can, in fact, just like anything else under the FMLA, you're entitled to get documentation that shows that. Now, if it's for the school closure, if they want to bring you a printout from the internet that shows that their school district is closed, I will tell you that all schools in California are closed right now. So you don't need a whole lot. But if it's, for example, their daycare provider is unavailable because of some coronavirus related issue, you're entitled to get that information and substantiate the fact that your employee needs paid sick leave under one of these reasons that is listed here. It's not just some blanket, everybody gets 80 weeks or 80 hours in sick leave and they can take it for wherever they want. That is not the case. So the basic requirement, again, we're talking about employers with 500 or fewer employees. So it's full-time employees would get 80 hours of paid sick leave. So they're thinking in terms of basically, 2 weeks of 8-hour days. So that's why they come up with 80 hours. And that's why it sort of coincides with the first 10 days of the FMLA leave for the school closure or daycare closure issue as being unpaid. This is a way to make that little one issue expansion paid in this way. So if the employee is taking leave because of their own serious health condition, so that's issues 1, 2, or 3 in our list of 6 reasons, they are entitled to get 100% of their regular rate of pay. So they get 100% of their regular rate of pay if they're taking leave for their own condition and they qualify for it. Remember, again, they have to qualify for it. If they're taking leave to care for somebody else, then they are entitled to leave pay at 2/3 of their regular rate of pay. So they would get 2/3 if they're caring for somebody else. They get 100% if they're caring for themselves. Again, this is limited to 80 hours. I know there's some confusion, and people think that people are going to be able to take 12 weeks of FMLA leave at 100% pay. That is not the case. Absolutely not the case. So we want to make sure that that's clear. If you have a part-time employee, their paid leave is based upon the number of hours that they worked during the previous 6 months. If you don't have 6 months worth of employment for that person, you're going to look at, what is it they're expected to work, and that's how many hours, you would pay them off per week until they get to their 80 hours. So I hope that's clear. So I kind of always said this one here at the bottom here. If you're a full-time employee and you're taking leave for the emergency FMLA leave discussed above, for school closure or daycare closure, this is the way to get those first 10 days paid leave. Otherwise, the first 10 days of that leave is in fact unpaid. This way they can get it paid though. Paying for the leaves. So you look at how total pay, you figure out the regular rate of pay. It's basically like if you have piece rate employees, you would kind of calculate it the same way you would do for NPT, non-productive time. You're going to figure out their base regular rate of pay, and add in all their compensation, divide by hours basically, and then you are going to come up with their regular rate of pay, and that's how you're going to base their pay when you pay for the paid sick leave. There are limitations on the paid sick leave. If they are taking it for their own serious health condition, again, items 1, 2, or 3 on our list of 6 reasons to take paid sick leave, it's capped at $511 per day and a total of $5,110 for the 10 days. That's obviously $511 times 10 is $5,110. So that's the limit on paid sick leave for their own serious health condition. If they're taking leave for somebody else, it's $200 per day and 2,000 hours or $2,000 capped. Again, that's 10 $200 days for a total of $2,000 as the total cap for paid sick leave. Again, we talked about you don't need to pay the overtime premium, but you are looking at the number of hours someone is normally scheduled to work. So in a given time, so for example, if you have somebody who's regularly scheduled to work 60 hours, you would pay them 60 hours sick leave straight time in the first week, and they would get 20 hours of sick time in the second week. And after that, they're out of paid time unless for some reason the reason they're taking it qualifies for that paid family emergency leave for school closure or daycare closure. Okay, this does not, there's no carryover here to subsequent years. By its definition, this statute expires on December 31, 2020. So at the end of this year, this law expires. Now, they may change that between now and then, but by its very terms, this law expires on December 31st of this year. So there's no carryover, nothing gets carried over to next year. If you had somebody who happened to be out on leave and on December 31, they were still out on leave, the paid sick leave would expire. If they're out for the daycare closure, for example, that leave would expire. It all ends on December 31, 2020, unless Congress does something to extend it, but they haven't done that as of yet. We'll wait and see. But again, this is a temporary statute. So again, just to recap, sick leave for your own serious health condition, 100% regular rate of pay. If it's for somebody else or it's for the school closure family medical leave, it's 2/3 of their regular rate of pay, 2/3 regular rate of pay. There's no qualifying period of prior employment for paid sick leave. It's available immediately. You could have somebody come in on the first day, and on the second day, if they're qualified for paid sick leave, then they get it. If they have available sick leave under either the California or, for example, the Arizona laws, either 3 days or 24 hours in California or the 40 hours in Arizona, this is in addition to that. This does not replace that. This is in addition to that. So if they haven't used any of their paid sick leave in California, for example, they would have 3 days plus 80 hours. All right, so it's in addition to state mandated family leave or paid leave. It's also in addition to anything that you might grant as an employer above and beyond their regular rate of paid sick leave that is required by the state. You are required to post a poster on this. There's the links here to the posters in both English and in Spanish. You can print these out and post them wherever you post your posters, but make sure you do post the posters. That requirement is in place. These posters should be up. So go ahead and post those. Again, there's no double dipping on sick leave. You get it one shot. The only FMLA leave that is paid is for school closure or daycare closure. This law is not retroactive. So today is the 31st of March. Okay, if somebody goes out today, this doesn't cover today. It doesn't start until tomorrow. It goes in effect tomorrow and it ends on December 31st. It is not retroactive. Now, I had lots of questions about how am I going to pay for this? It's going to throw me under the bus. I'm not going to be able to stay in business. What they've done to try and address that is give you an ability to claim some credits against taxes to help with your cash flow. I put a big red first bullet point there. I am not a tax professional, so don't take anything I say as complete tax advice. I am not a tax attorney. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a tax professional. I'm going to summarize what the Treasury Department has put out and tell you what they have told us. And I will tell you that if you have intricate questions about this, please consult with your tax professional and get your questions answered thoroughly. That's a highly technical area, highly complex, and I don't profess to be a tax professional. So, but that said, this does allow you to take credits against the employer portion of quarterly Social Security taxes and Medicare taxes, and it covers the employee portion. And so you, instead of submitting those payments that you would submit for your quarterly taxes, you get to retain those funds and you claim a credit against that. So it's 100% of qualified family sick leave payments and 100% of the paid sick leave taxes. So if you are paying those, you get to claim a credit against those. You do not have to deposit them with the IRS. This does not cover state taxes. So please make sure you're clear. It doesn't cover state taxes. It is only federal taxes. And the maximum amount you can take is the maximum amount of paid sick leave you can do, which again is $511 per day per employee for their own self serious health condition, $5,110 in the aggregate. And then if they're caring for somebody else, $200 per day or $2,000 in the aggregate. So it's up to, if it's the child care leave under the FMLA, it's $2,000 or $200 per day or $10,000 in the aggregate for the total of 10 weeks that they're able to take that. And so here is something I quoted kind of this from the information on the guidance that the IRS put out, the Treasury Department put out. There it says an additional tax credit determined on the cost to maintain health insurance for the eligible employee during the leave period. That's in their blurb that they put out, and one of the I think one of the links we have at the end is to the tax guidance that the Treasury Department put out, IRS put out. It does say that. I don't see that anywhere in the statute. I don't see it explained anywhere. I don't understand that other than what it says on their blurb. So please talk to your tax professional about that and make sure you get that clarified, because it's on their guidance to employers on this, but I don't see it anywhere in the statute itself. So it's a little confusing in that regard. So again, you're going to be able to withhold depositing the actual taxes on federal income tax, employee share of Social Security and Medicare, and employer share of Social Security and Medicare taxes. Make sure that you are keeping good records of what it is you're doing, so that you can make sure that if you get audited for some reason, you've got the right records on what you paid to the employees under this statute, and that you are claiming the correct credits. They have said that, I don't know if that's the next slide. No, what they have said is that they're going to not try and hammer people on this. If you get it wrong and they tell you you got it wrong and you promptly fix it, they're not going to try and prosecute people and issue big fines. So they know that this is pretty quickly thrown together, that it's hard to follow, it's complex. And so if you get it wrong, do your very best to try and get it right. But if you get it wrong and they tell you you got it wrong, please just quickly fix it, and they will going to have a sort of a grace period for errors on this. So we want to make sure that we fix it as soon as we can if we find out you did something wrong. Here's an issue that's going to come up for growers and FLC on the tax and FLCs on the tax credit. For purposes of this law, now we know for purposes of like the Ag Labor Relations Act, the FLC is not the employer. The grower is the employer of the FLC's employees. That is not the case for payroll, right? So the FLC is going to pay the sick leave to their employees, and in some fashion or another, they're going to bill the grower for that. The FLC is the one who's actually going to be able to take the credit for paying the benefits under this statute. So growers and FLCs are going to need to get together and determine, how that's going to play out, who's going to get what financial benefit out of this, and what financial burden out of this. But it is something that has a potential for problems when they drafted this. Of course, they're not thinking of grower FLC relationships where, if the FLC provides the paid sick leave, pays it to the employee, and then just bills the grower for the full cost of the payment of sick leave, but then gets to take the credit for it, and the grower doesn't get the credit for it. There's going to be some issues that people need to discuss. So make sure, growers and FLCs, that you're discussing this issue and how that's going to play out. So here's some of the sources we've got that list the links to various places where you can find resources. There's some good information on some of these things, and I would suggest you take a look at them. In particular, this IRS guidance on taxes is important. Here's another link to the posters, both in English and in Spanish. The Department of Labor FAQ is very, very good, and answers lots of questions that people have. Cal OSHA has a nice little guidance. We're going to do an additional webinar tomorrow in terms of some of those issues, what's reportable, what's recordable, in terms of this. And so there's some good information there. Of course, we've got the AgSafe page that lists their resources, and so that's a good source as well. So with all of that said, I've kind of quickly, in just under 40 minutes, gone through the material, and I'm happy to answer questions as we go. So I don't know how exactly we want to do that. I'm looking at the Q&A, and I can see some of the questions here. I don't know if anybody, I don't know if that's something you guys can see on my screen or not, but I can see the questions. Should probably close that so people don't see what who asked what questions. But why don't we have somebody from AgSafe sort of can ask me the questions, and I'll answer them.
Can you hear me?
I can, just fine.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So this is Angelina again. I've been keeping a tab. Yep.
Great.
So what we're gonna, so I'll do the best I can. As people are writing messages in, just continue to put them in the chat, and as he's answering, I'll just kind of add them to the bottom of my list here. So can the extended paid sick leave be taken intermittently?
Yes, it can. If the employer and the employee agree. There's a number of questions that specifically address the technical issues of that in that Department of Labor FAQ. So if you look at that, one of the things it talks about is leave can be taken intermittently if the employer and the employee agree for these purposes. Normally, that's not something that the employer has a say in, but for these reasons, the employer does have a way to say yes or no on some of this, and it depends a little bit on whether someone is able to work at home, remotely, or whether it's something where people have to show up and work, and it depends on that. But there is a way to take this intermittently with employer consent.
Okay, excellent. The next question, and I believe you answered this with the paid sick leave under wage order 14. You covered that the 3 days were in addition to the 80 hours, or
Yes,
the 80
yes.
hours, or 24, 27.
Yes.
Then I've got, how are the fluctuating amounts or numbers of employees affect the tax credits?
That's a very interesting question. And I think, again, that's one you're going to want to make sure you understand thoroughly with your tax professional, because here's an issue that I see. If you say, for example, you've got 700 employees and you say, hey, I want to be progressive on this, and I want to go ahead and I want to grant these benefits to my employees, even though I'm over 500 employees and I don't have to. The question that pops up in my mind is, are they going to let you take the tax credit because you don't have to do this? I don't know the answer to that. That's not addressed anywhere in that Irs guidance. I've not seen that addressed anywhere. One of the things that we talked about, I briefly mentioned that there's some talk about them doing something for employers who are over 500 employees. And one of the things that they speculate is that if they do so, is that they're probably not going to allow the employer to take the full tax credits or any tax credits or something to do with that. So we don't know, but if you are fluctuating back and forth, and for some weeks you're under 500 and for some weeks you're over 500, I'm not clear on whether you're still going to get to take the full tax credit if you're over 500 and you're still paying this. I don't know the answer to that. That's the tax professional question. I haven't seen anywhere where that's addressed in any of the stuff that they put out so far.
Okay, great. Thank you. The other question, and there were a couple of questions related to this, it was about not necessarily verifying if the schools are closed, but if you can ask for some sort of verification that they actually have school-age children.
Yes, I think you're able to ask for that. Now, here's one of the things that can come into play sometimes, is that when you ask for proof of something that you might not ask for proof of in other areas. For one thing that comes into play sometimes is if you ask somebody for proof of their spouse, being out sick and they have to take care of their spouse. If you ask for proof that someone's a spouse for purposes of FMLA, but you don't ask for proof that they're a spouse to put them on health insurance, for example, now you may run into a problem there. In this situation, I think you're probably pretty safe to ask for some sort of proof that they have a child in school. This is a unique situation. They are relaxing some of the rules on things that you can do here. For example, you are allowed to take employees' temperature under this because of this. It's a health pandemic, and they have relaxed the rules on that. You can actually take everybody's temperature. So I think there's going to be a little relaxation of that, and I think you're probably okay to ask for proof that they have school-age children and that the school is closed.
Okay, perfect. So there were questions specific to Fresno County, and there were a couple of questions. I tried to group them together. So
Yeah.
The county public health officer in Fresno County is requiring health screening of essential service employees. It mandates staying home for 3 or 7 days if symptomatic, and then those who were in close contact to them to stay home for 14 days. Does this qualify for paid sick leave?
It's kind of funny. As I was getting on here today, I had a client here in Fresno County. I'm in Fresno, by the way, everybody. I had a client in Fresno County who, for the first time, made me aware of this health order that went into effect a week or so ago. Nobody has heard of it. in Fresno, basically. They're also requiring everybody to screen every employee with a little health questionnaire every day. It's insane to actually try this. But my thought is if somebody has said, hey, I don't feel good, and so I'm staying home, that's not going to qualify for this. It's going to require a doctor saying you need to stay home. Yeah. What they're looking for here is some sort of somebody has said, hey, I've seen you, or I've discussed your symptoms with you via, a tele visit with your doctor that they're doing nowadays. And I think you need to stay home. And other than, hey, the county said, if I don't feel good, I should stay home. That's very different. I think that's very different.
Okay. I think you answered this one. Paid sick leave, are they getting the 80 hours plus the 3? Yes.
Yes.
How is the count of employees determined? As an FLC, should we base it on the count from last year or the current year?
It's based upon when you're doing the count of 500 employees. So if somebody takes, let's say the leave could potentially start tomorrow. So you would look at your payroll tomorrow and say, do I have 500 people on my payroll on the day that the leave is set to start, or do I not have 500 people on my payroll? Now, do I have more or do I have less? And so as you look at the day of the payroll, and you the leave is to begin, and you see how many people are on your payroll.
Okay.
So if last year during the height of your season you had 1,000 people, but this week you've got 200, and someone tries to take leave this week, you would say, I've got 200 people and I'm covered. Right? You wouldn't say, hey, at the height of my season, I'm 1,000, and so I'm not covered.
Okay, got it. Just in general, if the employer instructs an employee to go home because they seem to have symptoms, does that make them or qualify them for that sick leave? So in this case, the employer is the one instructing the worker to not come in.
I don't think that it does, because the way they've answered it in the Department of Labor FAQs is that it really is dependent upon a medical provider saying you need to stay home. So I think what would happen is if the employer says, hey, you look sick, you need to go home, they're going to, that would certainly qualify for their state, paid sick leave. So that would certainly qualify for that. But for this, I think they would have to go to the doctor and get a test that says either you're positive or not. Now, granted, there's not a lot of testing going on. It's getting more widespread, but it's hard to get tested for this still. But if you go and your doctor then says yes, you should stay home, and they've got a doctor's note that says yes, they should stay home, I think that's qualifying.
Okay. And then they wanted you to elaborate a little bit more on what part of the expanded FMLA and FFCRA paid sick leave does not apply to an employer with 50 or more employees.
There's nothing like that. There is no such thing. It applies if you have 500 or fewer employees, all of it applies to you, unless you go in for that small business exemption and you say, I've got less than 50, and basically this is going to put me out of business if I have to comply with it. And the Secretary of Labor has said there's a way to get around this if you have less than 50 and you meet one of those 3 different criteria that I covered. And you can say that this is going to put me out of business. I won't be able to operate if I do this. They haven't told us how to go about applying for that. Where you're supposed to submit an application for the exemption, how to do that. They've just said that it's out there. But in general, this covers everybody. If you have 500 or fewer employees, all of it covers you unless you go out and obtain an exemption.
Great. So I think you're going to probably just have to go back to your slides. Maybe you've memorized this, but
Sure.
Someone wants clarification on reasons 2, 3, 6 of no more than $511 a day, capped at $5,110 total per employee, and then reasons 1, 4, and 5, no more than $200 a day, capped at $2,000 total per employee.
I went way too far. Okay, so it's broken down. Again, there's 6 reasons here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The first 3 are related to someone's own health condition, right? So you've been told to quarantine by a state or federal or local health official that says you, Pat Moody, must stay home because you've got coronavirus. Or the doctor tells you you should stay home because you may well have this, so you should stay home. Or I'm experiencing symptoms and I'm seeking medical treatment. This is all 1 through 3 are related to me, right? And so what they have done is they've simply picked a number and said the max number for that, for these 3, and I don't know if you guys can see my cursor or not, but for these 3 right here, 1, 2, 3, it's 100% of your pay. That's if you are taking the leave for your own health condition. 1, 2, and 3 is your own health condition. You get 100% of your pay, but they have picked a cap. Why they picked $511 per day, I don't know. I'm not sure what the magic behind that number is, but that's the number they picked. And then if you do it over 10 days, that's a max of $5,110. That's $511 per day times 10 days is $5,110 max. The other ones, 4, 5, and 6 is, or at least 4 and 5 we know for sure is caring for somebody else. We don't know what 6 is because they haven't said anything as to what 6 is. But 4 and 5 is caring for somebody else, or again, because you're 4 and 5, 4 is caring for somebody else, 5 is the closure of the school or the daycare provider. So that's caring for somebody else. They have said that if that's the reason you're taking leave, then you can get sick leave of up to 2/3. You're going to get 2/3 of your pay up to, and again, they just picked a number here. I don't know the rationale why they picked $200, but they picked $200 per day. Or if you multiply that out times 10 days, that's a total of $2,000. So that's the max you get, $200 per day or $2,000 total for reasons 4 or 5. 6, we don't know what that is, so I'm not sure what we're going to do with 6 yet because they haven't told us what 6 means, right? But for 1 or 3, it's 100% of the employee's pay, capped at $511 per day and $5,110 over 10 days. And 4 and 5 is we're caring for somebody else. It's capped at $200 a day and a total of $2,000 for the total of 10 days. So again, I don't know why they picked those numbers. I don't know what the magic is behind those numbers, but those are the numbers they picked. I'm sure it was just some sort of political back and forth, and they agreed on, that's the number they agreed upon. I hope that answers the question.
And then I know a couple of people have asked about getting copies of the slides, and I believe when we spoke, you were okay with us sending that out as well?
Yes, even with my typos and everything.
And no problem, I think they're fine. But for those individuals that are asking those more specific questions, that then require just going back and looking at definitions.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would also recommend, keep in mind that I will tell you this, the slides are just very brief summaries taken from those sources at the links on the last page. I would really, really recommend that everybody go to the Department of Labor FAQ link there and read all of that. It's very thorough. It's very good. It's written in plain English. It's not legalese. It's actually very, very good. So I would highly recommend you read all of that. If you don't read any of the other ones, go look at that one and read that one.
Okay, very good. Okay, next question. For employees that are waiting for results of coronavirus exam, if they were able to get one, are they entitled to paid sick leave?
Yes, that's number 2, I believe.
Okay.
Let me look up here. Oh no, I'm sorry, that's number 3. So they are experiencing symptoms and they're seeking medical diagnosis. That's number 3.
Okay. So say, and I believe you might have answered this already, but if they err on the side of caution, so they're a covered employer, 500 and under, and they qualify, and they determine that individuals qualify, they pay them the sick leave. What if they're wrong? will they not get reimbursed?
I think that the IRS is going to say, if you made a good faith belief that you were trying to comply with this statute, I believe that they're going to allow you to take the credit. Now, again, I will go back to my little red highlight there. I'm not a tax professional, but I have to believe that if you've made a good faith attempt to comply with this and you've paid somebody above and beyond what they're supposed to get paid, and it turns out, hey, they weren't really qualified for it, I think you're probably still going to get the credit. I don't know that for a fact. Don't quote me on that. But I have to believe that they're going to say, okay.
Right. Okay. And another reminder or just an announcement, we are also recording the webinar. So for those individuals, we'll do our best. I know Pat's been very gracious in giving us time to do a more consolidated form of this Q&A as well, with some answers as well for those of you that are jotting frantically the responses. Okay.
Yeah, again, for those of you who are quickly trying to jot down answers, yes, you will be able to get my slides. It has been recorded. And again, what I've told you today is a summary of what's at those links at the back. And I can't recommend highly enough that you go look at the actual information there. Again, particularly that Department of Labor FAQ page. It's again, I'm summarizing what has been said there.
Okay. I've got a couple more questions here,
Yep.
and I think people are writing some down. And patience with me. I know some people are putting stuff in the Q&A, so I'm doing chat first, and then I'm going to jot on over to Q&A so I don't lose my place. Can you explain the first 10 unpaid days in relation to FMLA? If an employee is asking for leave in relation to the lack of, say, childcare, school issues, number 5,
Yes.
they could get the first 10 days or the 2 weeks paid sick leave, the 80 hours, and any regular sick pay that may be available for these first 10 days, and then it says, and that is correct. I think they're just asking for clarification.
Yeah, the first 10 days of the expanded FMLA leave, let me see here, where we go. First 10 days are unpaid. Again, remember, there's only one reason for this expanded leave. That is the closure of the school or the daycare. So the first 10 days under this is unpaid. Now, if they have paid sick leave down here under the other paid sick leave law, they can substitute that in for this place. But here's something that may come into play. Let's say somebody gets symptoms of coronavirus, and they go to the doctor, and the doctor says, okay, you need to stay home for 14 days. They can use their paid sick leave, their 80 hours. They can come back later and get this this sick leave or this expanded family medical leave if their kid's school is closed or daycare is closed. You know, they might come back later and need to use this, but they've already used up that paid sick leave. In that case, their first 10 days of the expanded leave would not be paid. It's unpaid because they don't have other paid sick leave to come into play. And let's say they've used up all their state mandated sick leave and they don't have any vacation. There's nothing that the employer has provided that they have, and they've used up the 80 hours of paid sick leave under this law. Then they need to take the leave because their kid's daycare is closed. Okay, then that first 10 days is unpaid. So there may be situations where this would in fact be unpaid. There's also, you can't force them to take their paid sick leave for this if they don't want to. They're entitled to do it, but you can't force them to. So somebody may come to you and say, hey, my kid's school is closed and I need to stay home to take care of them, but I don't want to use my 80 hours of paid sick leave to cover this. I don't want to use it. I want to keep that in case I need that somewhere down the road for me. So if they do that, you can't say, hey, you have to use that paid sick leave. They can take this without utilizing their 80 hours of paid sick leave. And then in fact, these first 10 days would be unpaid. I hope that clarifies that.
Great. So with regards to 30 days, you know, the 30 days that they have to be employed, if the
Yes.
employee worked 2 weeks and then that employee stops for a week, then comes back, are you just looking in aggregate at the 30 days, like the 30 calendar days
It's
worked?
calendar days. You're going to look
Calendar
at 30
days.
calendar
Okay.
days. Yep. So they worked 30 calendar days. It's not 30 work days. It's 30 calendar days. So if somebody works for you for 2 weeks and then they're out, you know, you have a slowdown and they don't work for a week and then they come back and they work and then they've met their 30 days. It's when they meet 30 calendar days.
Okay. If an employee is now out on leave for childcare issues and filed unemployment benefits, does the employer now start to pay sick leave through the company starting on the 1st of April?
I do not believe so. I know going the other way, that is not the case. And I honestly, I don't believe that's the case in this. I'm scanning that that DOL FAQ real quick. So I'm looking at questions 23 and 24 and 25 in the DOL FAQs. By the way, there's 60 FAQs in this, and it talks about if the employer closed the work site beforehand, can I still get paid sick leave afterwards? And it says no. And so I would tend to think that that's not the case. If you have that specific situation, that's one of those I'd want you to get a hold of me, and we'll find out the exact answer. I don't know that one off the top of my head.
Okay, so we'll leave that kind of open-ended. All right. Let's see. I have a couple of questions coming in, I think, from the same individual, so bear with me here. So can the employee work 6 hours in the workplace and get 2 hours of paid under the extended paid sick leave because of lack of childcare?
I believe that that's answered in FAQs, that has to be taken in full day increments.
Okay. And then if the employer disagrees on accommodating the intermittently the paid sick leave, are there any sort of consequences or repercussions for the employer?
Say it one more time.
So if, you know how they could take the paid sick leave, they don't have to take it the full 80 hours all at once. If the employee and the employer can't agree to that, is there any consequence for the employer?
I mean, I think you're going to want to show that you've got a good faith belief for why you're not doing it, and a good faith rationale for why you're not doing it. And then if that's the case, then yeah, you should be fine. Now, can they file a claim with the EEOC saying you wrongly denied them FMLA leave and you've got to deal with that? Sure. That's one of the issues that can come up. But I think you're going to be able to say, hey, this is something I had to agree to, and here's why I didn't agree. Now, if they catch you, agreeing for some people, not for some other people, and they can say it's, some discriminatory reason, now you might be in trouble. But if you're consistent in what you're doing and you have a good rationale for why you're doing it, then I think you're probably okay.
Okay. Let's see. Someone is just asking about clarification for taking the employee's temperature at work.
Okay, the EEOC came out with a guidance under the ADA. Normally, taking someone's temperature would be considered a medical exam, and that's not something you could do, but they have said because of this specific scenario and the fact that it is something that can, be looked at, and one of the basic, indicators is a fever, that they are allowing people to take the temperature. So you are allowed to take a temperature. They put out a guidance on March 19th that specifically says, you're allowed to ask if they're experiencing symptoms, and you are in fact allowed to take people's temperature.
Okay.
But they do caution that not everybody who has this has a fever. So don't think that just because someone has a fever, they've got it, or just because they don't have a fever, they don't. It is not a definitive test.
Yes, correct. Yeah, I was hearing that as well. And then keeping that information private, correct?
Yeah, obviously that's got to be kept confidential. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I think you answered the day taking the childcare. So if an employee takes 1 day per week for childcare, does the 80 hours have to happen in those first 2 weeks only?
No.
No, they can spread it out.
Yes.
Okay. If the company is over 500 employees now, but then drops below the 500 mark, so now they're covered, a covered employer.
Mm-hmm.
When they drop down, is that when they begin to do what needs to be done in terms of covered employers?
Yes, because then they become a covered employer and are obligated to comply with this.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Let's see. So, Pat, is there any guidance for companies that have 500 or more employees?
Nothing yet. They're talking about it. They haven't put anything together yet. They keep getting sidetracked on other stuff. Right. Like I say, there's been some speculation on what they might do to those people with more than 500 employees, whether it's they're going to require greater sick leave, or they're going to require higher rates of pay, or they're going to not allow any tax credits or reduce tax credits. There's all sorts of stuff flying around there, but they have not enacted anything for people with more than 500 employees as of yet.
Okay, perfect. So if an employee shows up to work and the employer sends the employee home, I think you might have covered this, because they seem to have symptoms that, would the employee be entitled, this is a different question, just a little different, would the employee be entitled to reporting time pay? So they showed up to work, you sent them home.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. It says, are the tax credits refunded, or do we request to not pay them?
Yeah, so the credits are actually, you normally, when you take you deduct the wages from the employee's pay, you don't pay it to them, you deduct that, then you submit your deposit with your share and the employee share. What this is you don't make that deposit. You claim the credit instead of making the deposit. So you keep that cash. So it helps you with your cash flow. So it's a cash flow help. It's cash flow assistance. So a credit is different from a refund. A credit means you don't pay it in. A refund means you pay it in and you get it back. So this is a credit where you don't pay it in. Now, there is a way, if you end up paying more in sick leave pay, either under the single reason for expanded leave or for the paid sick leave, and what you pay is more than the taxes you would end up owing, then there is a way to claim a refund from the government, and they're supposed to be coming up with a process to do that with quick turnaround refunds they're talking about within a couple of weeks. They have not, as far as I've seen, issued the process for doing so yet. Again, check with your tax professional on that. But if for some reason what you've paid out in benefits under this is more than the income tax and the basically the FICA taxes that you would owe, then there's a way to claim a refund.
Right. So 80% of this company's particular employees are women with children at home.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can predict. It says, can you predict how extended FMLA will affect them?
Here's my thought on this, and I've talked to a lot of people about it. I will give this caveat. I'm an attorney. I have employees, but I don't have ag employees. I've got non-ag employees, but I've been around ag employers for 30 years. And one of the realities of ag employment is that our employees tend to live pretty paycheck to paycheck. And, it might take them 90 or 95% of their paycheck, to sort of pay their bills. And if they're going to stay home with their child because the child's school is closed, keep in mind they're getting 2/3 of their pay. I think that most people are going to fairly quickly realize that they can't pay their bills on 2/3 pay. And so what's going to happen is you're going to find people coming up with ad hoc daycare. And I think most people are actually going to continue to work because luckily we're in agriculture and we are deemed, by the state and the federal government to be an essential industry, and we're allowed to continue working. And I think people are going to be appreciative of the fact that they can come to work and earn 100% of their pay rather than people they know who don't work in agriculture who are now out of a job and getting 0, or people who are on leave and trying to survive on 2/3 of their pay. I could be 100% wrong on that. That's just my guess. I could be wrong on that. But I think most people are going to not try and take a free vacation with this kind of thing. I know employers are worried no one's going to show up, but I think there's a couple of things. First, the FMLA is the only one that's extended. The other one, the paid sick leave is 80 hours. I mean, it's only 80 hours, right? In agriculture, that's less than 2 weeks of work. And so that's not an extended time period. The FMLA leave for the school closure or daycare, that is in fact extended leave. But again, it's paid at 2/3 of their regular rate of pay. And I think most people aren't going to be able to do that. I think they're going to have to work. I could be wrong.
Perfect. Okay. So for clarification, the extra 10 weeks for reason number 5, who pays them? The employer or the state?
The employer.
Correct.
The employer pays all of this. None of this is paid by the state. This is not like, this is totally different than if they go on unemployment and they apply to the state to get unemployment payment, or if they're disabled and they go on to get disability payment from the state. This is different from that. This is employer paid leave. It's no different than think of this as exactly like the mandated 3 days of paid sick leave that you have to give in California, or if you're in Arizona, you've got to give 40 hours. This is the same as that. It's employer paid. The state pays none of this. This is also, keep in mind, this is all federal, so the state has nothing to do with any of this. This is a federal law that has nothing to do with the state.
Okay, great. Okay, so if the employer decides to take people's temperatures and someone comes up with a reading, maybe that it's higher, are there precautions that they're supposed to be taking? What are they supposed to be doing now that they have that information?
Here's the thing. I know everybody wants to take the temperatures, but not everybody with a fever has this, and people who have this may not have a fever. So I'm not 100% sure what good it's going to do you to take people's temperature. So that's just my little take on that. Now, if you take somebody's temperature and they've got an elevated temperature, and they've got other symptoms of this, cough, itchy eyes, whatever the rest of the symptoms are, you are entitled to tell them to stay home. You have the ability. The EEOC has come out and said you may tell them to stay home, and the FEH put out some FAQs as well that says you may tell them to stay home. and send them home. But you got to decide what you're going to do, because if you do that, then you're going to have to start doing it for everybody who shows up with that particular set of circumstances.
Okay, perfect. Yes, that is what I was hearing as well. I think a couple of these you have already answered. I will just clarify with you. The exemptions for, and really anyone over 500 employees. If you have 500 employees, that's the extended FMLA and the paid sick leave of those 80 hours, correct?
Yes, this is all part of one amendment to the FMLA. So it's all part of one
Correct.
thing, and they're both 500 or fewer employees.
Okay. And then, so say an employer has variable hours, so in the workday, so perhaps they're only now working 5.5, 6 hours, 5 days a week. Are they still having to cover those 80 hours, even though they're working fewer than 8 hours?
It's 80 hours over whatever amount of time it takes to get to 80 hours.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's 80 hours. It's not 80 hours in 2 weeks. It's 80 hours.
Okay, great. We'll do a couple more questions, and then Pat, we probably will just, what we'll do is, for those of you that have been very patient with me reading through the questions, I know that there's some duplicates here. We'll do a Q&A that we'll also send out probably next week with some of those other follow-up questions if I didn't get to your questions for those that are participating. Again, as a reminder, we're recording this session. We will have the presentation, and we will be sending out a link, hopefully by the end of this week, with the presentation and the recording for those of you that are on. And then the Q&A, give us a little bit of time to just clean it up and make it look nice and pretty for people. Yeah. So that we're not, because there's a couple of duplicate questions and people just wanting to clarify the items you've already clarified here.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure.
And I will, if you can't wait that long to get your question answered, I will throw this out there. You can contact me. I would really hope
absolutely.
not 100 of you contact me, because I do have to continue to work and make a living. But this Department of Labor FAQ that I'm sort of, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this on the last page here, the second to the bottom one, that Department of Labor FAQ answers lots and lots of these questions. That is real, the real genesis of my presentation. That's a very good thing for you to read.
Okay, perfect. All right. So let me see if I can get, I think you've answered this one. Someone is asking about employees kind of moving around and taking advantage potentially of the 80 hours and the sick leave. Is there any ability for, I guess, anyone, is anyone tracking employees that may be moved from companies? No.
Nope. It would be no different than, again, treat it just like you would your 3 days of paid sick leave. If you have somebody who takes 3 days of paid sick leave for you and you catch them working for your neighbor, can you deal with it? Absolutely. It would be the same thing here. How would you track that? There's no way you're going to track that unless you just happen to catch them. Right.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Okay. You answered some of these. So again, if you can accommodate telework, but the employee does not want to work at all, are they entitled to extended FMLA or paid sick leave?
Absolutely not, because they are not unemployed. You've offered them work and they've refused it. So they can't get paid sick leave because they're not out sick. They can't get family leave because they're not working because of school closure or daycare closure. They can't even go get unemployment because they're not unemployed because of a reason not of their own choosing. They're sitting out there, and you can terminate them because they're refusing to work and perform work that you've offered them.
Right. Okay. Okay. So are you good, Pat? I think we answered the majority of these questions. There's a lot of questions in here.
Yep, I know.
So I'm going to try to just type some of these out for us so we've got them, and then clean them up a little bit. Okay.
Very good.
Alrighty. We want to thank everyone that has been on, and for your patience for everyone that's been on. We're going to end the session.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay.